First of all, let me say I never knee-jerk to anything, and I don't intend to do so today. But the answer to your question is that I was totally unaware that such an interview was to be given to the Belfast Telegraph. So I learned about it when you learned about it. That was the first knowledge I had. Let me say that the assertion that the institutions aren't fit for purpose isn't one that I agree with. The difficulty is that those working the institutions have to be fit for purpose and have to have a commitment to equality and parity of esteem and recognising that there are others in government with them. Obviously, the main gist of what the media are dealing with now in the aftermath of the interview is the proposal that there should be what are described as St Andrews style talks Mark II. We were very much involved in the effort last year through the good offices of Richard Haass and Megan O'Sullivan to get a breakthrough on 3 toxic issues dealing with the past, parades, the whole issue of flags, symbols and identity. And we in Sinn Féin signed up for those proposals. We made compromises to our own position on the 3 issues to do so. And of course that didn't work out. The Unionist parties couldn't bring themselves to agree a way forward, even though one of them, within hours of the closing deadline, said we were 90% there. And then we ended up in a scenario where all of the parties came together in all-party talks, again to try and deal with those issues. And then on foot of a Praise Commission determination, within hours of those talks assembling, the Unionist parties left the talks. So now we have a scenario where people who have run away from the talks are now proposing that there should be new talks. So I asked myself, what's that all about? Is it about a renegotiation of the Good Friday Agreement? Is it about a renegotiation of the St Andrews Agreement? Is it about what's called voluntary coalition? Is it about a return to majority rule? Is it about trying to take decisions without Sinn Féin having any say in those decisions, which we think dramatically affect the lifestyles of all of the people right across the community that we represent and we don't represent? So when I then hear that the talks should be open to what's described as the smaller parties, I hear a very clear invitation to parties who are not on the executive and not represented to any great degree in this assembly to be part of the talks. Who are they? The TUV, the PUP, UKIP and the Orange Order. In fact, the approach to the talks, from my sense of what I read, is that they will come into the talks with this grouping that formed itself both last year and again this year in an attempt to overturn decisions that were taken in the best interests of the entire community. So the reality is that the difficulties that we are in today are on a number of fronts and is derived from, I believe, the unwillingness, inability, refusal of Unionist politicians to accept, for example, a democratic decision at Belfast City Hall on the issue of flags. The inability, unwillingness and refusal of Unionist politicians to accept a Parades Commission determination. The refusal, unwillingness and inability of Unionist politicians to have any faith in the justice system with their criticism of the judiciary. Now, added to that is the whole challenge that we face in relation to budgetary considerations, and the fact that since 2009 there has been absolutely no increase whatsoever to our block grant, which represents swinging cuts to the block grant from this British government. And going into the figures of last year, and I was involved in meetings last week, quite clear that we're facing into cuts of something in the region of £500 million from the British government, before you even look at the issue of welfare cuts. So that's the challenge that we're facing. I am not fighting with the DUP about the issue of welfare cuts. Our fight is with this British government, a British government that appears not to care for the most marginalised, disadvantaged and disabled within our society. And it's quite interesting to note that in all of the conversations that I have had with David Cameron over the course of this process of introducing the welfare cuts, which I remind people came after we put our programme for government together. At every engagement with David Cameron, I've raised the issue of how damaging this is for our society. And the only support I got, particularly at joint ministerial council meetings in London, was from Scotland's representatives. And it's quite interesting to see in the course of the last 24 hours that we have Gordon Brown, obviously with the full support of the Cameron-Clegg government, say that they're prepared to offer new powers to Scotland as some sort of an enticement in advance of the vote. And what do one of those powers contain? The devolution of social welfare to Scotland. Well, I would argue that if that's on the agenda for Scotland, we need a bespoke social welfare agenda process for our situation here, given that all of this was dumped on us by a British government made up of millionaires in London. So that's where we're at the moment. We in Sinn Féin are always up for talks, but I do caution all of you, I caution the public and the media to consider what prospect of success there is for talks when some of the people in those talks will be representing the TUV, the PUP, the Orange Order and UKIP.
Do you accept that Peter Robinson's figures up to €1 billion the social welfare reform is going to cost over a period of time, with a possible loss of thousands of public sector jobs?
Well, what that ignores is the mess that social welfare is in at the moment in England, with the universal credit being totally discredited, and those who are experts in the matter saying that there's no prospect whatsoever of any of that getting off the ground. So what I am arguing for quite clearly is for all of the parties to come together, to meet with the British government and to tell the British government that we don't accept their approach to lumping these fines, this agenda, these huge cuts on ordinary defenceless people, placing them in a scenario where their lives are going to be devastated by the changes to the social welfare payments. And of course, that's not even taking into consideration the hundreds of millions of pounds which will be sucked out of our economy each year by these decisions introduced by the coalition government in London. Hundreds of millions of pounds which will not go into shops, not go into local businesses, not go into local restaurants or other service industries throughout our society. So yes, we do face huge problems. We do face huge challenges. Sinn Féin has always been up for an engagement on meaningful and genuine and positive dialogue and discussion to resolve problems, and we will do so again. But I do caution everybody as to whether or not this is a serious attempt to resolve these issues. And I think many people out there will be asking themselves very serious questions about those who have been invited to talks that have not yet been agreed, and the very negative approach that they have adopted towards these institutions over the course of many years.
Mr. McGuinness, you say that your fight is not with the DUP, but it's the DUP, you're part of the government, the First Minister, who is saying that Shoreline is unsustainable. Surely you have to reach an agreement with them.
Well, I don't agree that our position is unsustainable. My position is that the institutions are fit for purpose, but it has been quite clear. It's been quite clear to me over the course of the last certainly 18 months that we face a very difficult situation in terms of working with the DUP around a range of issues. And it's no secret to anybody standing before me that the whole issue of the plug being pulled on a programme for government commitment, very serious programme for government commitment around the development of the Maze Long Cache site in the interest of all of our people, providing thousands of jobs, that came about as a result of elements within the DUP who were hostile to that project, who forced Peter Robinson to change his mind. I met Peter Robinson 2 days before he left this country on his holidays, and the Maze Long Cache project was a green light. And that came as a bolt out of the blue to me whenever I learned that the plug had been pulled. And it later became quite clear that the reason the plug on that development was pulled was because there were people, once known as the Gang of 12, some people say now the Gang of 9, who effectively put it up to the leader of the DUP and forced him to change his mind. So, and the other big question you see that people have to ask themselves when we go into a negotiation, if we ever do, is who are we negotiating with? Are we negotiating with people who can deliver? Anything that I said I would deliver in the lifetime of the last 7 years that I have been involved in these institutions, I have delivered.
Do you think Peter Robinson can't?
What I'm saying is that 2 days before Peter Robinson left on his holidays last year, he and I had a discussion about Maze Long Cache. It was green lighted, it was going ahead, and the next thing I heard about it wasn't in a phone call, wasn't in a letter to me, not an email or anything else. It was a letter that went directly from Peter to his party saying the project wasn't to go ahead. You can read what you want into that. You can read what you want as to who is pulling the strings now within the DUP.
Are you saying a categorical no to a fresh round of negotiations?
No, what I'm advising people about is this, and that is you have to make up your mind as we have to make up our minds, and the public will have to make up their mind as to what prospects of success there is for a negotiation which includes the TUV, UKIP, the PUP and the Orange Order. It's a very straightforward question.
Right, folks.